It's April the 13th. We are looking out our bedroom window. It's very sunny. There's lots of birds. Smokestacks from the incineration plant in Ringsend are burning away. But all is quiet in Dublin town. Today, coronavirus numbers hit over 10,600 cases and 365 deaths. So our heart goes out to all those people, both here in Ireland and around the world, who have lost their lives to this bastard of a thing that has changed humanity. The dawn is with me, as ever. How are you, Chicken Licken?
Asymptomatic.
Asymptomatic, yes. Well, that suggests that you have it.
Well, I could do that. Yeah, I mean, what else can I say?
Apathetic. Ambivalent.
No, I wouldn't say I'm ambivalent. I have some really fucking strong feelings. Am I over it?
Yeah. I don't mean...
It comes in waves. It comes in waves. Like, I swing between, right, sure, look, Netflix and snacks, is it? Right. And I will say, one thing I'm learning as the weeks go on is that there are very, very few people I have any interest in being anything but socially distant with. So...
Why is that?
I can be critical of people at the best of times. Just the general behaviour. Like, when people are really bored and... much like me, they suddenly think people give a shit what they think, and they get on Facebook and Twitter. And I knew there was something wrong with them, but I didn't quite know what was wrong with them. Now I fucking know. It shouldn't be so hard. And then I look at all the people I encounter online and I go, no, I'd find it hard to be quarantined with you.
You're an awful lot more social media adept than I am. What's the sort of vibe you're getting from your Facebook groups?
Well, I am and I haven't. Because you'll notice I only really do Facebook. I have a Twitter and sometimes I use it to abuse the Iona Institute like every normal person. But I don't really do the Twitter unless something big is breaking. Not on the ground.
What's the general vibe?
I mean, like I have a particular cohort of people that are going to be left-leaning women between the ages of 30 and 60. Actually, that's men as well. But there's a huge cohort of that, and group thinkers. Sorry, no one's clicking into my Facebook page going, oh, look, they have a new one. So I'm like,
yeah.
If you did actually find this link on my Facebook page, I wasn't talking about you. Because the rest of the group didn't. Within the group think, there's an awful lot of really nice people who would generally just try not to be arseholes and kind of go, okay, I think I should be a bit lefty. I think I should care about poor people. Racism, that's not good. Let's not do that. So kind of the best ordinary people of society. So I joke when I say the group think, but there is a group think to thinking, okay, I'm not an expert, but I've kind of listened to what people say and I'd like to be decent. I'd like to, like, things like racism, the poor, like just general worldview. But that does involve a bit of a group think. So the general thing seems to be a little bit of virtue signalling. And by a little bit I mean a lot.
But define what you mean by that.
The odd one that puts up all the fucking pictures of the homeschooling shit and the crap
I'm
that she baked.
homeschooling better than you are, yeah.
Yeah, you're doing
the
more
perfect homeschooling mom.
Yeah, so there's a bit of that. And then by week 2, everybody catches on and it's like, listen, we're at the gym. We're doing our best. The kids are still alive. Has anybody actually checked in on that fucking homeschooling app, whatever one your school is using? No. Didn't actually like that teacher anyway. Bit of a dope. Sure, look. The kids learned to make a nice gin and tonic. So everyone got into that vibe by week 2 and that was nice. And now you've got the fucking COVID Stasi. I saw a person and they didn't look like they were related. Excuse me, how do you know they're not from the same? Well, they were out for a walk and they're not from the same household. How do you know? Because one of them was of colour. You can't say that. And so it's quite entertaining to watch. They're wrapping themselves in knots trying to criticise one another. And I do think, like, look, we've had arseholes that have, nobody admits it online. You know, they've been pissing off to this place and that place. Well, okay, before lockdown, when people could still get pack into parks, and even during lockdown, when people could all piss off to their holiday homes, people weren't shouting about it online. It wouldn't go down well. And fair enough, arsehole thing to do. But I also think there's an awful lot of people who just haven't considered thinking outside the box. Like, the rules and restrictions are there for a reason, but there's no one size fits all approach. Yeah. There are people with extra needs and I know that that's been covered, but the world and his wife and Patricia behind her net curtains has decided, oh, they're going here and they're going there. Like, really, you have no idea what's going on in people's lives. You have no idea. There are people who seem completely well and they're on injections every day that they can't take by themselves. And it's not a nurse that comes to their house. It might be an adult child that has been looking after them since they had cancer and you didn't fucking know they had cancer because you're a nosy bitch and they didn't want you to know.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of people like that. There's people with extra mental health needs. There's a whole lot of reasons why people are doing certain things. I have a few friends that have been meeting up, but they had decided they don't have any family. They live alone, and they had chosen one friend from the start and said, listen, we're going to buddy up and we're going to do our walks and shit. I'm not going to ring anybody else because this is probably going to tighten into lockdown. It's going to go on for a while. And those people would be going on a little holiday, like to the fun factory if they didn't. So they're making the most responsible choice they possibly can while bending the rules and not shouting about it. So I've not a huge amount of time for the COVID Stasi. And a lot of them, they're doing that clapping. Yeah, we did the clap. But I'm seeing far too many videos of little Johnny had his 5th birthday party and he was just devastated because he couldn't get the bouncing castle. So he asked everyone on the street to all come out to their front gardens. And you're like, grand, you're a metre apart, but there's like 70 of you on the cul-de-sac.
Hoeing on each
and you're
other.
giving out fucking yards about that one person who maybe met their friend from 4 kilometres away and went for a walk, but they were like, the antidepressants aren't working out, they can't see their therapist, they're kind of going, I'm going to have a meltdown, they're at home all the time with the kids, and they made that choice to keep them going, and they're not seeing anybody else. Fuck off.
So I've been self-isolating I was only out of the house for 4 days out of the last something like 30. I'd attended a Steve Martin and Martin Short concert in the 3 Arena, which was the last concert I think probably held in Dublin. It wasn't very good, as those of you who know Steve Martin and Martin Short could imagine. But it was packed, and I came home from that and it was like now getting like, Cheltenham is going to be on and all this kind of stuff. So I stayed in, and I've been in basically in lockdown from partly due to what the Don's talking about, because the Don lives with her mother who's older and has had some health complications, and she has 2 kids. And so we had our own little barrier to the disease, and that's one of the reasons I didn't go out. I didn't even go out walking. But yesterday we went for a walk into town together because our little armour has kind of broken down a little bit. So we have to get back to sort of self-isolating now from this week. We went into the city centre of Dublin. It was biggest 2 streets in Dublin are O'Connell Street and Grafton Street, the main shopping street, and just desolate. Wasn't it weird? It was like a nuclear bomb had gone off and killed all the people.
Yeah, it was.
And of course, the shit show that is the United States of America just keeps trundling on. One of the funniest things to watch on television these days is the Donald Trump daily coronavirus press conference, where he comes on and like a pantomime villain just sits there talking about how tremendously great everything is, and how big ideas are being done, and how there's no panic, there's no problem. And meanwhile, outside on the news, one person is dying, I think now every 40 seconds in America, and he's just, ignoring it. And it's fascinating. Remember we were talking about, in one of our earlier Corona podcasts, about what would happen if only black people died.
Yeah.
Well, shout out to Steve Bailey, one of our regular listeners, who just sent me in some of the detail on that. And yes, African Americans are more susceptible to the virus. I haven't
seen the details on that. I know you mentioned it to me briefly earlier on, but I have some recollection of hearing something in the past week. But I think it wasn't solid, but it was that it looked like, much like it looked like the type A blood types a couple of weeks ago.
So I'll put a link to that. There's a link to that on the blurb of the podcast. But yeah, looking likely that certain and my blood type is one as well versus yours. So it'll be very interesting to see what else. Trump continues to just go on about the economy. My latest understanding is that we're probably 4 to 6 months, I'd say, probably in this at some level. The schools may reopen. They might let it surf through the children and stuff like that. But I think we're going to have to sort of hunker down for longer than we think, possibly the summer. And how's that bit of it all? Have you any? We had some tips the last time we were on. Have you any?
I think it depends on what you're coping with. For a lot of people, it's the lack of routine, which people say, it's difficult. Depends. And I think everybody needs to just have a bit more compassion and understand that not everybody is as robust as you. If you're not somebody who has ever been in real danger mentally, you don't understand. It's not a case of, some people feel things more than others, and it's hard on some people, maybe just be less selfish. No, the reality is, and it's very hard to, if you've never lived in somebody else's head, it's very hard to understand that while they're pontificating about what everybody needs to do and all that, everyone needs to have a serious look at themselves and consider that people around them are not robust. They're very easily scared. And people who haven't had mental health issues are going to tumble into crisis, and they don't know what to do with crisis. They're not used to that. You know, people are very quick to share the darkness into light walk, and you know, my phone is always there. But there are some people that have never hit crisis, and they're going to hit crisis, and some of that is loneliness. People never really talk about loneliness. They talk about it when you're talking about elderly people, and that's a massive one now. But I think most people know what it's like to not be able to sit in their own company, but I don't think most people have experienced profound loneliness. That's going to have a massive impact on people.
Well, what should somebody do if they are feeling like they're slipping into a black hole, or people who maybe think one of their friends might be?
I think like the obvious thing is to reach out to your friends. There's little things like that I think is probably causing FOMO at the moment is you see all this stuff online or on the RT News about Zoom and Skype, and look, this is how people are keeping together, and that's great if you already had loads of friends and it was going great for you. You're quarantined, you go, right, okay, Saturday night we're going to have the lads, instead of being at the beer garden, but we're all going to do Zoom, and some of them are couples. That's all great, but the reality is there's an awful lot of people. If you just think of age 30 and you think, right, there's loads of people at that, you know, they're moved in with their girlfriend and the gang can't get together, we're going to get together on Zoom. Yeah, deadly. There's an awful lot of people who don't have a solid friend group, who have friends who have to work really hard to get themselves out. Like, I'm getting messages from people that I'd chat to and I'd have banter with, but I don't really know that well, and I wouldn't tend to have big conversations with. I'm getting private messages. I've gotten quite a few just from people saying hi and checking up, and I get the impression from some people that they don't know where the party's on and they're quite lonely. And so it has occurred to me to try and put some people in touch, to like add them to Facebook groups that I think have people they'll end up getting bantery with. You know, if there's a lot of single girls in one group of friends that I'd chat to, and I find another one, I kind of go, I wonder, could she do with joining in the banter and then saying, here, listen, are you coming on the Zoom call? I'm trying to do that to make connections for people that I think are a little bit on the outside. I think if there's somebody you're worried about or you're concerned about, yeah, give them a message, make the call, because it might be an awkward chit chat and you couldn't really be arsed, but you know, that might be the only chit chat they have.
And then there's things like direct provision, which is basically the immigrants into this country who are being sort of held in hotels and institutions around the country. There's the homeless situation, which, you know, would have been and has been top of our agenda on many of our podcasts, which there's still a lot of people homeless out there. We met one yesterday on our walk who was in a pretty bad way, wasn't he?
Oh God, yeah. He was drenched, all his feet were wet and that. Like, and you feel terrible. Like, I mean, I had £10 in my pocket and I gave it to him. And what do you say? Mind yourself. Like, and I remember thinking, how the fuck is he supposed to mind himself?
I know. So, I mean, it's hard to even do a podcast that's in any way meaningful about it. We're all in the same boat together. Every single person in the world, nearly, you know, every country in the world is affected. Every person in the world knows about it. I mean, you know, there is the slightly cynical approach, which is we were talking about the other night, which was people in Africa are probably some of the worst affected countries in Africa for other things. They're probably going, really, there's a flu, is there? Well, we still have malaria, and we've got AIDS, and we've got starvation to tackle before we get to that. So I'm hoping that, you know, if one of the things that comes out of this is preparedness and having hospitals and having personal protection equipment, let's make it a global thing. Let's make sure that hospitals in Lusaka and Dr. Congo and Malawi and places like this get proper medical equipment put in for the diseases that they're suffering from, which are also fucking lethal and very, very contagious.
Of course, that's not going to be the upshot, is it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've talked about it to a couple of people saying it wouldn't be great. I think I mentioned in the podcast if we put together in every country a small group of people who are intelligent, who could just look at all of the lessons that we've learned and start looking at ways of applying them. Things like Spain are talking about universal basic income, which we touched on last time. That might be a thing that could come into other countries. The doors have been blown off capitalism right now, and it'll have to come back. It'll come back as capitalism, but it might come back as a kind of a capitalism, more of a social.
Sorry, I'm laughing because only because I recorded this exact conversation on Ayla's podcast a couple of days ago.
Viewing from the gallery, check that out on Facebook. It's a 10-year-old girl's view of the coronavirus.
Yeah, so you have to edit it, but Sean hasn't actually heard it yet. So I'm interested to hear how close or where you will differ from my 9-year-old on your view of the death of capitalism, as she put it, and universal basic income.
Well, there could equally be a good case to be made for bringing a bunch of 10-year-olds together and putting them in a room, and they might come up with a far better solution to the world's problems than the idiots who run us into this swamp have done. Yesterday was Easter Sunday. Boris Johnson resurrected himself from hospital, like the second coming, second Dominic Cummings. And funnily enough, was on television extolling, quite rightly, the virtues of the NHS. But the two nurses who cared for most, one was from Portugal and one was from New Zealand, in the Caggle. So those people will be kicked out of Britain, I think, if the majority of Brits who voted Brexit get their way. But
God love them being looked after, two people coming over here taking our jobs.
I know, exactly. There's things like that, I don't know, this borderless element of corona. I mean, I will never live to see it, but I've always dreamt of a world federalism where it's the world and everyone happens just to live in a different part of the world. The world gets looked after by human being rather than by where you're from or continent you're from. Hundreds of years away probably, but little things that can just sort of tip us.
I love the tremor of fear that I know is going through a certain element of people listening to this, hearing you talk about globalization.
Yeah, but I mean a different globalization.
No, I know, yeah.
I mean a kind of I don't mean a globalization just of selling and buying and greed and consumption.
But I think the people who, they'll wax lyrical about that element of globalization, but I'm talking about the people who have co-opted the Irish flag here for the past while.
Yes.
And there'll be no borders and, so this like suddenly vamped up nationalism. I'm not into nationalism. And I don't think you are. It's one of the, I'm proud to be Irish. I like my country. I like a lot of aspects of our culture, and I'm proud of some of the things that we've done and we've overcome. I'm proud of the empathy that we've shown in how we've tackled things in the past couple of years, but not in a nationalist, close the borders kind of, we're Irish. And no, I'm a person first. When you look at the upshot of this and you think, I dream of it, but it's probably a long way away about globalisation, I go, yeah, but the other upshot could be people saying, well, now here's a very good reason why we'll keep our clean little green island off in the Atlantic, and it's about keeping it safe. It's not about racism. We don't dislike other people, but we're a very quarantined country, and look at what's happened. So we're just looking after. And I'm like, yeah, but the people who'd be smug as fuck about that would be the arseholes, and I would fucking hate that mentality.
Well, we're talking about neoliberal white people by and large.
We're talking about scangers from some shit end of Blanchardstown deciding that they're smart because they read some crap on Facebook, and now if they go up with the likes of Peter Casey and Gemma O'Doherty, they make them feel clever by comparison.
This is the Donald Trump approach to America. This is the Boris Johnson Brexit approach to Britain. It's about circling the wagons, looking after number one, looking after your own people first. In many ways, this virus shows how flawed that thinking is. Even if you are Make America Great Again, you're not allowing Mexican people come in or people come in through the Mexican border. There's an argument that says that should be controlled better than it has been, but not the way Donald Trump is proposing to do it, including part of his wall which blew down onto the Mexican side, which was quite funny. You end up having this tiny particle that can come in anywhere. It can come in on a cruise ship, it can come in on a bird, it can come in, God forbid that we get one that's airborne.
Yeah, true, but to me the bigger concern is even if that works and you kind of go, look, we're not being assholes, but let's look after our own. I don't really like those people, and I wouldn't consider them to be my tribe. I'm proud to be Irish, but I consider the people in direct provision to be my countrymen and women because they live here, and the conditions they live in are appalling. I've seen things online this week it's no big fucking surprise that they're treated not even like dogs in direct provision, they're treated like shit. They're living their years. They were raising their kids here. They've come here for whatever reason, probably for safety. New Irish are Irish people. My own are not the fucking nationalist, selfish fuckers that are like, make Ireland Christian again. Fuck off.
So that scales up and down. So on a macro level, and the one thing I know, because I've done work and I've studied books on the situation, say, in the continent of Africa, is that most of the countries in Africa hate being called African. They hate the idea of lumping such a vast continent into one soundbite. But generally speaking, the world ignores Africa. Not totally. We do send, famine relief and all that kind of stuff. But you know what I mean. We don't consider Africa as, and maybe 30, 40 years before that, we didn't really consider Asia or whatever. There's a Western first world. There's a second world now, which is your China's, Brazil's and stuff. And then there's still third world countries. So in every country, there's a third world element. In Ireland, we have abject poverty. We have people who are not being looked after. We have homeless people. So it kind of scales, it's fractal, it scales up and down, and you kind of go...
Yeah, but the African thing is also an interesting one because, nobody likes... I mean, they don't like to be known as just Africa. But also, people from Europe tend to rip the piss out of Americans saying, I went to Europe. Like, really, which part? Because was it Crumlin or was it Berlin? Like, which one?
Israel.
But there's a... I used to laugh at the Eurovision Song Contest. But with Africa, it's also like, those countries didn't exist. If you look at the fact that there are all of these individual tribes that were then shoved into countries, and aside from the colonial aspect of them being robbed blind and treated like shit, there's also the fact that they were not countries, they were not nations. Like, that's an interesting thing to think about when you circle back to the discussion about who are your people and closing borders. I find it really fucking interesting that the same people who are disgusted that we don't own this country in Africa and that country anymore, like the idea that the EU imposed this thing and there's the one currency and there's going to be an army, they're imposing their way on us. Like, the country getting most upset about that, England, and I'm not going to say Britain, I'm going to say England.
And they leave behind a civil war, and they leave behind despotic rulers, and they leave behind abuse of natural resources and money grabs and all that kind of stuff. So I guess back to to the big questions, can it, I don't know, my fervent hope is, and I know it's giving us a line in the sand, it's giving it, the planet is handing us an Etch-a-Sketch to start again. Whether we just draw the exact same bad picture of a $100 bill on it, to use a really bad analogy, or whether we draw something else on it that's going to be more poignant and meaningful and more modern way of going forward. Because we also have computers, we have climate change, we have a whole new way of working coming, where they're predicting 300,000 truckers are not going to be out of work in the next 15, 20 years in America, and because of driverless cars. And
so what I see happening is not either or. I probably I change my mind every day depending on how pessimistic I'm feeling on that day as well. There's that. I do think that there's going to be a bit of an etch-a-sketch moment, or certainly people will all think that they're doing that. Everybody will pat themselves on the back and think they're looking at it from that point of view and say, things have to change. This could happen again. What have we learned from this? There will probably be shouts of UBI, but I mean UBI in the sense of what Americans mean when they say UBI, which is not fucking UBI. So there'll be a bit of that for a couple of months. It'll still come back to, do you think at a time when economies are recovering, they're really going to give a fuck about some hospital in Rwanda? I think the shiny bollocks of, let's find a new way, we have to find a new ism, it's the death of capitalism. Yeah, but I don't think it'll quite stretch into those corners.
Yeah, but you find, you find a new ism, the sound of one voice, and you, like, are we either working towards it or are we not? Are we studying it? Are we putting in place robust thinking tanks that will actually say, here's what we could do, here's how it could work economically,
but what I'm saying
here's how
is,
the money could be divvied out better?
I think an awful lot of people
not.
I suppose I look at this and I look at the Irish government. I could see the Irish government and Irish economists and that. I could see them looking at it and really wholeheartedly thinking, let's find a new way, but I don't think they're going to look at the ugly under parts of doing actually work on themselves and deciding how intrinsically selfish are we. And to say, we're going to find a better way and we're going to break down capitalism, we have to change things, is fine at a surface level. But if you're not going to break down the inherent privilege, the inherent selfishness, the lack of care, if you're not going to really dig deep into the human psyche and into the attitudes and biases that we have, rather than just the surface work of how the economic system works, then bit by bit it's going to wander its way back to selfishness. Capitalism under a different name. I can see an awful lot of really educated white men meaning well and looking at the top layer of how we run a society and what we're going to do differently and thinking that they're changing the world. But if you're not changing they're not going to do any deep work on themselves. Eventually human nature will carry us back to patting ourselves on the back thinking, oh, we're very modern. But actually, we're not really giving a shit about people less well off. We haven't really looked at the whole compassion thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think with every industry, though, you can see, if you just pick at random an industry and you go into it, like, for example, let's just take something that everyone kind of knows about. You're not a big fan, but I'm a big soccer fan, okay? And if you look at that industry has become greedier and greedier and greedier as years go by. It has also become saturated with too much of the sport. Every time there's a live match on, there's ad breaks and there's advertising in it, there's people watching, to the point where it becomes so uninteresting and meaningless. And now actually that we haven't had Premier League or whatever, or any soccer for a month, I'm amazed at how I don't miss it. And I find, or golf or tennis or... Now, sport is an important thing, but the sporting bodies could say, look, let's just cut it back. Let's just have less games that are more meaningful. Let's cut the number of teams in the Premier League so that we can give more money maybe down to lower teams. Let's cut the number of lower teams. Let's stop the Champions League flights all over Europe every week for a preliminary tournament that actually is meaningless because all the top teams get through it anyway. And let's make the sport much more kind of interesting and engaging. Let's not have so many fucking golf tournaments. Let's not have people flying around the world for sport all the time. So I'm just taking sport as a sort of a big...
No, I can see that. Because I'm not into sports. Like when I hear you saying that about it being saturated and if it was brought back, I kind of go, well...
Well, you know it's saturated from the amount of times I watch it.
Oh, Jesus, No, it's just that sound in the background, that irritating sound. There are a few sounds I can't bear.
Especially when I'm at American football late at night.
Oh, I despise that one. And then there's horse racing. I dislike the sound of, but if I get into it, I can cope with it. But I dislike the sound of it because it reminds me of being like 5 or 6 and stopping to go to the bathroom in some pub and just smelly old men and depression and a smell of cabbage as well. Yeah. And so I hate that sound. Yeah. I hate the sound. Like the sound. Because I'm not into sports, I have to follow it if it's there to an extent. Otherwise the sound of it, the sounds really kind of trigger up little childhood memories of it being on the background. And oh look, it's time for the Angelus and like I couldn't give a shit about football, but everyone's going to watch if the Ireland is in the World Cup. So there is that point of bringing a bit more soul into it, where it's actually not just constant.
Well, I mean, even in advertising, I can see a far better way of running advertising accounts globally, having less people in a room to do the same thing faster and better, and stop this constant talk fest and stop being so afraid, because actually advertising, in this grand scheme of things, the business that I worked in for so many years of my career just has shown up to be this outlying bullshit kind of business.
Oh, it's a lot of shite
that the world doesn't need. And I've got lots of friends who go, oh, stop picking on advertising. Advertising people are great and we're such nice people and we're really creative and we're really they're not creative anymore, and they're being not that nice, and they're political little weasels. They're about a money grab. And that's the sort of business that you could look at, and I could pick 10 people around the world who would sit on this thing and we could make it. I mean, the biggest ad agencies are looking like they may collapse, 1 or 2 of them on this thing, and good luck to them, And so they're just 2 businesses that I know. But then if you talk about engineering, building roads, hospitals, homelessness, housing, if people were just working intelligently to make small changes that could be reinstigated as soon as the switch was switched on. Schooling.
Funny, because I was thinking with football, and then you mentioned advertising as well, and I just kind of thought the biggest problem in my mind, the biggest problem in my mind with advertising is that there's just far too much money in it. There are some people who are like, they do their own little bits of art and whatever their medium is, but like they're kind of cool, they're kind of creative. But let's not fucking tell a lie. There are shitloads of people who are just too thick to do medicine and law, and daddy knew someone in fucking advertising. Thick as shit and making too much money, and they swan around like they're saving the world, and you're looking at them going, you are fucking dense. Like, I don't know how you managed to cross the road. You're fucking dense. When you fuck money at idiots, this is what happens. It makes them more fucking awkward. And the problem is, idiots that know they're thick are bearable, but idiots who've decided that they're intelligent are fucking unbearable.
Yeah, I was one of those idiots. But I mean, I think even at the time, I knew I was one of those idiots.
That's why they used to pay you one of the...
That's why they used to pay me the big dollars. No, it's like... No, but like even when I was working in America and I was, I climbed up the greasy pole reasonably far. When you got there, you just look around and go, really, this is... I mean, that's why I stopped. this was my nirvana, getting up here. And you kind of look to yourself. Lots of people don't look at it. Lots of people go up and keep going. And I know friends who can't get out, can't leave, even though they've got enough money to make Croesus blush. I mean, it's...
I don't know. Let's be honest, there's no way I could ever have fucking lived your life. But if I had, you'd know damn well it's like fucking... Like, now, the difficulty would be like the temptation to hang on for another year and just like rake in a little bit more cash before having a big fucking strop, an almighty strop. I don't know how people go quietly into the night. What is it, late 50s, that they all start whinging about, oh, the work isn't there anymore, and there's young people who'll do it for cheaper. And what I love is the outrage, right? It's and it's not all of your friends. I know some of your friends. I know it is difficult, and I know they do get cast away. Yeah. But for some of them around the world, this look of absolute outrage on their face.
No, I mean, I've been outraged since before outrage was a thing. Giving out about the fact that the business used to have some level of the importance of standing out, the importance of being creative, the importance of making you smile, touching you in a way that you go, now you can say that that's a bit nefarious, which is fine, and it is, but at the moment it's just put any old shit up there that you could do, that I could do, that your kids could do.
I beg your pardon, I could not do that. Vapid shite.
I'm not here picking on advertisers, we're just talking about something that I know. I'm sure if we picked pumps and boilers or
and I'm picking on advertising people.
Yeah, even within the advertising industry, you meet people in lots of different businesses that you're dealing with. Okay, so I worked with Procter and Gamble, who are one of the biggest marketeers in the world, and you could apply similar rules with them. You could say there's meetings that are full of 20 people who think they're important. Cut that down to 3. Cut it down to 2. What do you do with the other people? I don't know. Give them something better to do in the company than sitting in there deciding whether the word is fruity or juicy for their new fucking jelly that they're making. The amount of dumb brains that have been put to task is triple what's needed for something so insignificant. This whole idea that give out to the person who bags the industry, that's done by people who don't know how to do it. That's done by stupid, uncreative people protecting their jobs. And by the way, I'm not saying that I'm a genius at advertising. I'm far from it, okay? I'm far from it. And I'm not saying everyone should be like me, but that's what people will read from this. I'm saying I want to be the thickest person in the ad agency, amongst the thickest people. I want the agency to be full of people who are 10 times more creative than me, 10 times more intelligent, smarter, curious, well-read, interesting. But you know what? Why would anyone like that want to work in the ad business?
See, I know what you're saying, and I know the part of you've kind of walked away. Like, it didn't throw you out of advertising. You've walked away and gone, yeah, okay.
I know, I was fairly unceremoniously kicked out of it, I'd say.
You've spent your entire life doing that.
I did walk away.
I think you're just like, yeah, fuck it. It suited you.
Well, I would defend the business to say that it was more focused at one point on the quality of the communications. That bit's gone now. So there was a time when you can say, you were studying last year. You saw ads from the 70s, 80s, 90s that
genuinely
were far better than the shit that's out there.
Yeah,
today.
It has gone to shite.
Anyway, we're off point a bit. So, but anyway, the general point is that I think that within every industry, anyone who's listening to whatever industry you're in, look at it, and I bet you could come up with 5 ways where there's profligacy, where there's a need to change, where there's a need to be fair, like across the board, the way workers are handled in a general sense. Smash the unions in the 1980s, Thatcher and Reagan. That has caused untold damage. Even though unions, lots of them were fucking run by gangsters and it was badly organised. But now the worker has no one to fight for them. We're on 0-hour contracts. We're on people, you don't want the job, fine, there's someone in line.
Yeah, the 0-hour contract thing has been going on for a long time, and the essential workers that we actually have, the people stacking the shelves, are the ones that in the past 10 years anyway have been treated the worst.
Apropos of the advertising discussion, it's cast great light on who's essential and who's not essential, and the huge imbalance of pay. I used to be most of my life mortified for the amount of money people in advertising were paid, and I was kind of like, you looked in here, mate, but like eventually your conscience will be at you the entire time going, how can I take home triple the pay of a nurse or quadruple the pay of a teacher? That's just an imbalance. And if you talk about unions, maybe the new union is there doesn't need to be a union. Maybe the new union is companies start saying, the most important thing is profit and people. The most important thing is that our people get looked after, and we treat it like a family again, and we handle it internally, because the nature of a union employer relationship was always extremely hostile, right? It was all about who could get the best deal for who. What about if that went away? What about if it became, look, you know what? It's not about tripling profits every year. It's about increasing profits by 10, 15% for the shareholders. That's a good return on investment. Yeah. Plough back the other profits into helping, people.
That attitude works in co-ops and nice small family businesses and stuff like that. But unfortunately, having people and profit be the driving force, well, it's often seen as one or the other. And we see now, like, there were COVID payments paid to certain small businesses, and they're not passing them on.
Yeah, and companies wanting to buy back stock with the bailouts they're giving. It's...
There will be small businesses, particularly like small family-run businesses, where they take in, they're like a second son, and they go, we're going to treat them really well, but they work really well for us, and we take seriously our business, but they're part of the family. You join the family when you join the company. There are examples like that. Not a whole lot of them. A whole lot of them, it's a case of profit or people. Which one are we going to put first? Because they're in conflict for an awful lot of people based on their business model, and that's not going to magically change.
And then the other element overriding all of this is that we have, I think most people agree with this, a climate problem that we need to solve. And here we are with a version of that front and centre in front of everybody right now. And those two things need to come together. We need to use the shutdown, the sheer explosion that's gone up in the entire world, to put ourselves back together in a way that accounts for the problem that we need to remove.
This is a great argument for that, because the number one thing is kind of going, well, yeah, we can't shut down the economy, like, come on. But we've seen now is actually we can if it's an emergency. We just have to feel like it's urgent enough. So that should be a good argument. But I do think that what's actually going to happen is, people are going to be under more pressure. Economies are going to be under more pressure. People will care less, because we're only able to hold so many priorities in our head. It's a bit like when somebody earning 80 grand a year from an upper middle class neighbourhood in his hybrid car and cycles to work sometimes and says, oh, we have solar windows and panels on the roof, and we only use all the organic stuff, and we go to the farmer's market all the time. And when they pontificate to a single mother with 4 children who's trying to top up the gas card, she doesn't give a flying fuck about organic vegetables. Her priorities are different. And that's not me saying, oh, the tree hugger is trying to save the planet. We all live on the planet. They're not wrong. But you have to understand that people's priorities are based on need. And if people are in extreme poverty, their priority is never going to be, like, homeless people don't care. They're not worried about, is the cup recyclable? They're worrying about, can I get enough money in to get a hostel tonight? So I think after this, it's a fantastic argument for that. Yes, we can close down economies if the world needs it. This is what an apocalypse feels like. This is our warning from the planet. What do we do about it? But I don't think necessarily everyone's going to see it that way. And you can't blame them, because there's going to be people who don't know if they're going to be able to pay their mortgage, and maybe they can't. There's going to be people whose jobs are fucked. They've probably had a really rough time of it. Maybe they've lost family members. They're not thinking about the fucking planet.
The planet thing needs to happen at the top, not at the bottom.
Yeah, I do think it needs to happen at the top for that reason. And I think that in terms of priorities, you can understand why this time next year, I'd understand if an awful lot of people who are trying their best and taking it seriously, if it got knocked right down in terms of priorities for them.
I guess the point is that across the board, and I hear you, it's not about saying recycle your egg cartons. It's about saying stop pumping fucking effluent into the Lake Erie or wherever it is and poisoning half the population of Detroit while you're at it. It's just, and I've got those lakes wrong, sorry. Yeah, everyone needs to do it, because the problem with climate change is everybody's pointing fingers at somebody else. So the airlines go, we're only 5%. What about the shipping industry? That's 12%. And we go, well, the shipping industry are carrying cars. Well, why are they carrying cars? And then the oil companies that I just said, and the advertising companies, the economic and social powers of the Don and Seaniebee are hardly going to crack it. But we can be little voices in the tsunami saying, hey, what about if? What about if?
We won't be, though. We'll just be in the back throwing peanuts from the gallery.
Peanuts from the gallery. We talked about the resurrection. It was Easter Sunday yesterday, and no sign of God to fix this anyway. All the pastors in America who are making hundreds of millions, nothing from them. The Pope sent his thoughts and prayers and
it's very big.
Bowed prostrate in an empty St. Peter's. Well, you're going to get the people who go, this is a sign from God that, he's punishing us because...
Oh, well, no, there was the rabbi in Israel who said it was a sign from God, it was a punishment because of homosexuality, and then he got it.
Right, this show is also about the Don's top 20 countdown episodes of A Pint with Seaniebee. The last episode was dedicated to Pete Dunne, the artist who died. Again, PeteDunne.net is where you can find his amazing art and buy some of it. He'll be missed, and I'm sure he's laughing at us up there somewhere. So this is episode 151, and it is number 14 in the Don's top 20 countdown. As usual, she asked me 3 questions to see if I can remember the person that she has in her mind. We have no collusion on this. I don't know who she's picked. And what's your first question today?
Right, I've gone with 3 quotes. First quote, something in me was driving me to find whatever it was I was supposed to do with my life.
For God's sake, that's probably nearly everyone.
I know, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to just pass on that.
Grand, so the world is a school. It's a series of tests, and it's not all for naught if you understand the function. I'm here for a reason, and I'm here to experience this world and grow my eternal being, and everything that comes at me, whether it's money problems or relationship problems, is an opportunity for me to grow.
So that sounds like somebody who's... Is it a sort of self-help kind of thing? Matthew?
No.
Okay, last question.
On consciousness, conditioning is like the gunk on the windscreen of your car.
Ooh, I know this one. This is Dave Richeson.
It is.
Yeah, Dave is a good guy. That was a long time ago. And he comes at it from 2 areas. One, mindfulness. And, he was all over this way before mindfulness, which is the big new thing now. He has a famous teacher that he talks about who from whom he got this training, and he's also a big advocate for the whole race problem in America. And so, yeah, just a really kind guy who means well, and I really enjoyed our chat. And yeah, it's just nice having people like him out there. A lot of people like him get slagged off for being too, Kumbaya or whatever, and he's not that. He's trying to apply it, I think, to everyday living. And as I said, his thinking has come front and centre. Now, what did you like about it?
I picked it because, as you said, I know that the Kumbaya thing, and I have kind of a low tolerance for that kind of bollocks. I really do. So when someone starts talking about mindfulness or consciousness, and I kind of go, right, I'm interested, and I can't decide whether I'm going to love the conversation or whether I'm going to go, oh, for fuck's sake. And I have to say I fell on the right side of that with this. So it's none of the kind of mind, body and spirit shite. Like, I'm sorry if that's your bag. It's just not mine. There's a load of horse shit there. No, this was actually an intelligent conversation. It was a look at philosophy. There can be a lot of God smuggling in spirituality. What I mean by that, I don't mean the Jesus smuggling, but it's still... you get halfway through the conversation, you think it's a great one, and then suddenly it gets all a bit airy-fairy, and there's like, okay, you've replaced Jesus, but you've got magical gods in the sky kind of shit. It didn't go there for me. I'm not sure I'd land where he lands in the view of the universe, but none of it there's none of that shit. So if you're kind of wary of consciousness and that, it's an intelligent conversation. I thought it'd be useful at the moment. A lot of people are sitting at home. The mindfulness aspect, you could be sitting at home with nobody intelligent to talk to. So it's a conversation to toy with in your own head. And it's a good time to be looking at the meaning of life. I liked the fact that it kind of segued into Black Lives Matter and that kind of thing.
He told that great story about when he was in Texas somewhere with his granny. He was in one of those Holiday Inn type hotels. He was going to get changed to go to the pool. And he went and got changed, and then he came out 10 minutes later and went to the pool area, and when he got there were 9 cocks. Yeah, there were 9.
Jesus, I'm sorry for your troubles, Dave.
There were 9 cocks in cop uniforms pointing guns at him, and he was 9. Talk about terrifying the fuck
11.
out of a child. 11. He was 11. Sorry, but even still,
yeah. Well then, get over it. No.
And the name of I just looked it up here on my phone. The name of the institute is the Institute of Hermetic Philosophy. And there was a famous Chilean philosopher called Dario Salas Sommer who set that up. And it's an educational program that believes in promoting the power of consciousness. So probably a good time to be listening to stuff like this and looking deeper into some of the attitudes Dave has towards how we go about life. None more so than in this time of lockdown. Thanks to Don for being on the show. We'll see you next time.
Will you though?
Hopefully. Without further ado, I'll give you Dave Richeson.
Welcome to another episode of A Pint with Seaniebee. Today coming to you all the way from New York again. My guest today, a very bright guy by the name of Dave Richeson. Dave and I worked together in the city back in 2011. He's a PR supremo and still works in the public relations business. Today we're not here to talk about that though. We're here to talk about his other interest, which is in a school called the Institute of Hermetic Philosophy, a educational program that believes in the power and promoting the power of consciousness in society, something that is, we all know, sadly lacking these days. So something I don't know an awful lot about, and I was really keen to find out all about it, and I think you'll find it's a enlightening conversation. So without further ado, I give you Dave Richeson. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Let's start with the big news that you did when you left. You left public relations. Mm-hmm. I know you still work in PR, mm-hmm. but you set this school up. Tell me about mm-hmm. how you decided to do that and mm-hmm. what it is.
Well, it actually was a school that existed before. Okay. So it's there's a teacher in Santiago, Chile. His name is Dario Salas Sommer, and he's the philosopher who founded the school about 50 years ago. And I've been in the school for about 20 years in the New York branch.
School versus religion, discuss.
It's religion is more like dogma. Think about it like I'd say a spiritual gym. A lot of us, if we talk about consciousness, right? I think we come to this planet and we're conditioned by almost everything around us from the instant we get here. Subconsciously by our parents telling us what to fear and what not to fear, by traumas, dogs, or anything that happens to us as a child, the news, television shows, the whole Disney princess thing, obviously our business, advertising.
We're the worst offenders.
Exactly. Education. I mean, everything sort of gives us a point of view, and especially before we're 7, before we have any kind of volition, the stuff just gets embedded in us deep in our subconscious, and we really have no way to discern that after a while unless we really take a serious look at ourselves and really question all of our assumptions about life. And unfortunately, very few people do that. It ends up being the water we swim in, and you don't really notice it.
I'm glad we're having this conversation because I'm Irish, and I'm also 40-something, and most 40-something Irish people, I would say, would agree with me that the most damage that has been caused to us has been the whole Catholicism in Ireland thing, which is very hard to shake out from under because it's guilt-based, and also lots of other things, of course, that happen with priests diddling with kids and all that. Go back to this guy in Peru for a second. Is he some sort of guru kind of guy? Or?
I wouldn't say guru. I mean, I'd call him philosopher. I mean, it's Chile, Santiago, Chile.
Chile, sorry.
No problem. And he is just a guy who I would say, for one reason or another, just was a little more conscious earlier than a lot of us. And
let's start with this. Tell me what he and you guys mean by conscious.
Great. If you think about all that conditioning I was telling you about, think about that as like the gunk on the windshield of your car.
Okay.
So it's like you can't really get a clear picture of the world, of life, of anything around you, because you're looking through all these different things that are filtering reality at the end of the day, whether that's the religion, whether that is you were told earlier on to fear black people, white people, Chinese people, whatever it is, whether, whatever happened, the traumas that happen, relationship issues that happen, all those things color the way in which you interpret reality.
Right.
So when things are happening in the world, it's going through all those filters. Really, it's about cleaning out all that stuff that is between you and what's actually happening in the world. And unfortunately, because each person has his own gunk, it's usually one person communicating through his gunk, through your gunk, and then finally to you. And so communication, which is why we have such a hard time communicating, right? Which is why the world, we really don't connect very often.
What do you say to someone who doesn't really understand this and is about to find out about it all, but who would say that isn't that gunk the reality?
I would argue no. I would say that all those things are distortions of reality.
Okay, so what do you see as the reality of life then?
I think deep in our essence, there's something that exists beyond all of that. And I think if you look at even existentialism, right? The existentialists talked about getting beyond what Sartre called bad faith, Nietzsche calls it something else, but getting beyond all the sort of lies we tell ourselves. And they get to sort of an existentialist dilemma, right? They feel like there's nothing underneath that because it feels like a void, right?
Stuff,
once you get into all that. Now, what we say is, okay, past what feels like a void, there's actually something else. And a lot of people who do meditation or those types of things talk about feeling, once they get past the void and the emptiness, some kind of light, something that's connected to everything. And a lot of us have had these types of experiences, these higher consciousness experiences, whether it's from a great instance of making love, whether sometimes you've done it, in a drug experience, like some experience.
So is this
like
anything to do with ayahuasca? Does that play a part in this? Or?
Not in this.
No?
I would say that some people can get to these peak experiences in different ways.
Yeah.
I mean, this way really is through clearing out all the stuff that's between you and that deeper experience of life and that deeper connection that we all share in a very natural way. So I don't do anything I used to a long time ago, but not in the course of this path. I don't really do any kind of
No, I've never done it, but I followed Terence McKenna. Yeah, I followed some of his stuff, and he went down to South America and like actually really, I think, did it as a very bona fide educational thing from a professorial point of view. And one of the things I was really interested in his studies, he came up with the stoned ape theory, but one of his observations was that the guy who does ayahuasca or psilocybin or whatever it is in New York, in Wall Street, sees the same thing because he was charting what the images were that a guy in the Amazon jungle sees.
Yeah, I can believe that.
So there's this thought that there's some secret in there that is otherworldly or something, or that the human brain, even if the brain has been maybe covered in gunk like a Wall Street guy, keep talking to me about this reality.
Well,
what is the reality?
I think just like we know the electromagnetic spectrum, although we can only see sort of the 7 colors, is infinite, right? We know there's infrared that we can't really see, and there's ultraviolet that we can't really see, and that continues on and on.
Yeah.
So I think that is in all things. So we perceive a certain narrow band of reality. At other frequencies, there's other types of reality. Yeah. So ayahuasca, in theory, probably tunes our brains or our sensory perception to other bands. Right. So it makes sense that people would see the same thing, just like you and I are attuned to the same band right now, see the same tables and chairs.
Okay, so the educational experience is about clearing the gunk away. It's a nice analogy. You're then left with things like silence. You're left with things like the basics of being a human being, which is being good to people and stuff like that.
Yeah, and a deep connection both to yourself, to inner peace, because you don't have all that trauma still, and to everybody and everything else. Because when you get to the essential part, I'll speak about myself. When I got to a more essential part of myself, I felt much more connected with other human beings, with trees, plants, life. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the same thing animates all of us. Yeah. And if you can tap into that thing, it's like we're all in a sea of that stuff. But it's hard to feel that when you're worried about work and all the things you get worried about and you get distracted in life.
It's in the same bucket as yoga, and it's in the same bucket as meditation.
Everything
and stuff like that.
After the same thing.
This guy, you said in Chile, was 50 years ago he set it up.
Yep.
And is he still around?
He's still around.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about his life.
He was brought up in a kind of prosperous family, an educational family in Chile. Yeah. He always felt something was wrong in society, and sort of always felt like people were kind of play acting, and felt like he saw through people in a sense. Yeah. And over time, and he sort of was able to connect with this work, which I think is a universal work. It's been passed down through generations.
And what sort of philosophy? You called him a philosopher. What sort of philosophies does he like? What would be his main 3 things that he would be teaching?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is self-awareness. At the end of the day, it comes down to really everything being like reflecting through yourself. So understand that you're present here, and that as I speak to you, I'm not just losing myself in what I'm saying to you and losing myself in projecting to the outside. I'm also monitoring my heart rate, my speech. I'm looking at, am I trying to impress you? Am I accelerated? Or, so it's self-knowledge at the end of the day. When know thyself was on the top of the Temple of Delphi, it's sort of something that's sort of a known initiatic thing, and know thyself is a very deep concept the more you understand what it is.
I agree. I think that we don't study philosophy. A previous guest of mine, Glenn Condy, on this show talks about living in France and how, philosophy is on the curriculum of kids in France.
I know.
But here, and even in my
what are you going to do with that?
Yeah, I know. So, how do you spell it? But another observation here is, and I know it's very beneficial to people, and I'm not knocking it, but nearly everywhere I look here, people have got psychiatrists and psychologists on board, and they're seeing people, and they're trying to come to terms. I mean, is it fair to say there's more gunk in this city than there is in practically any other in the world?
There's a lot of gunk here. I mean, I think everybody has their own gunk, but New York has a special kind of gunk.
It does.
I mean, it's hard, right? There's so many people in this society, I guess you'll call it, New York, but people feel so constricted in their little bubbles.
Yeah.
And to have so many different kinds of people, but have most people not really interact with people who aren't like them still, where we're all packed together so tightly, is an interesting phenomenon. I see that a lot. If you think about the subway in New York, where, again, we're all packed tightly in this space, but no one's looking each other in the eye. And that's a very interesting kind of symbol for New York.
Self-awareness is not a huge jump to selfishness or vanity or stuff like that.
Well, it can be.
Define the difference.
Yeah, so it's a great difference. So vanity, start using kind of terms, vanity really sits in the ego and the false self.
Right.
That's not your essential self.
Yeah.
That is really puffing yourself up with whether you have a lot of money or a lot of beauty. You're still defining yourself from the outside. You're saying, because I have X, I'm smart, I'm beautiful, I have some attribute, therefore I am better than. That in a sense is sort of ego, vanity, those types of things. But when you get to a deeper sense of self, you realize that those things are really meaningless in a sense. I mean, they're meaningful in a sense that you need them, right? And to get in this sort of three-dimensional society, I have a job, I have to spend money, I got to pay for my apartment. But in any way to define myself, it's sort of a joke. It's like a cardboard cutout or a facsimile of a person rather than a real person. And when you realize that, all that stuff fades, and then you go, well, what's left? Once I realize that defining myself from anything on the outside is false, what's really there? And that's where the sort of existentialist dilemma happens, right? It's like, oh my God, who am I? And then if you go deeper, you find something that's more universal.
There was a theory going around that apparently science is taking more credibly than whether or not there's a God, which is that we may all be part of a video game.
Yeah, I can see that.
Which is quite a nice thought to think about. But when you actually start thinking about that idea, a couple of things come straight to your head when you talk about this existential nihilist sort of thing. There's a huge nihilistic strength to this, which is that everything is for naught, right? If we're just a video game. And the idea, the concept has been talked about to the point where the reason we don't understand infinity is it's a bit like, when Truman in the Truman Show crashed into the horizon. That's just the barrier.
One of my favorite movies.
Truman and also before it, Groundhog Day. Big ideas in them.
Exactly.
Matrix. But you have this thing where the reason we can't understand infinity is because it's the barrier of the game. It's just the program ends. And all art is for nothing. All war is for nothing. And I like to go around when I talk about this theory saying, and anyone who talks about the theory dies. So if I die in the next couple of days, just get this out there. How do you feel about that kind of, when you get down to brass tacks, meaning of life can very quickly drive down that road?
Right. So it's a fantastic question, and I used to be traumatized by that question. So for me, at this point, because I do believe that, like I said, if you get back to the essence, there is something essential. There's an essential being. There's a particle of light,
stardust,
or whatever you want to call it, that exists inside of each one of us. And when you connect to that connects us to the infinite, to the universe. At least in my comprehension of that, and my experience. I also believe that we can grow that light. The more awareness we have, the more moments of this consciousness we have, that light can actually get brighter. The idea of, to talk about different, religions. I think religions were all, enlightened beings in the beginning, and then it's a game of telephone that got it got bastardized over eons, and then people started using it for the wrong reasons. But if you go back to like what the Buddha said, or what Jesus actually said, or what there's a lot of truth in those things. And so if you think about those depictions of halos or glowing beings, or a heart that's on fire, a lot of depictions of light. And I do believe that this word enlightenment is an actual thing. That this little particle can get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's part of the teaching of the school. It's part of my own experience. So we're here for that. We're here actually to actually grow that light, because just like if I talk about a spiritual gym, the Institute's sort of like a spiritual gym, just like in a gym, if there weren't weights, you couldn't get any stronger. So you need inertia, you need something pushing against you to grow that light. I mean, so the world in essence is a school. It's a series
Learning
of tests, and so it's not all for naught as long as you understand that function. That if you actually think this is all real, in the Bill Hicks kind of way, and if you don't understand this is kind of a ride,
it's just a ride.
or it's kind of a test, then you're running around chasing your tail. But the minute you understand, okay, I'm here for a reason, and I'm here to experience this world and grow my eternal being, and everything that comes at me, whether it's money problems or relationship problems or whatever it is an opportunity for me to grow, an opportunity for me to understand more about myself, how I created this problem, and how can I uncreate it? How can?
But I mean, with that very laudable ideology that's full of integrity, we're in sludge right now, and getting sludgier.
Yep, absolutely.
I get the fact that there are a few people here and there trying to.
Are we really getting sludgier? So I see two things happening. Okay. I see Donald Trump and a whole bunch of crazy crap going on, but I also see Oprah with a channel about spirituality that you never would have seen. I never would be talking to my work, people about my spiritual work. 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, like we didn't even talk about it much. So it's the fact that we're able to talk about this. I do believe there's a rise in global consciousness among some, and I also believe that the dark side is getting stronger. And I think both things are happening. The
enlightened or the intelligent amongst us do know that there, I think, is, even if there's nothing after life, which was the reason religion was probably set up, there is within us some innate something that we don't know what it is yet. I've always said, do you believe in God? I go, yes, but no. But I think there's something we don't know yet. I think there's something Stephen Hawking doesn't know yet.
Absolutely.
And until we get that, and maybe God appears, Garabandal, he's meant to appear next year, folks, on March the 17th or something. Maybe something like that happens, and that rocks the whole world. But what was your background, and where did you end up getting to this point?
So I grew up suburbs of Baltimore, Maryland. I also, as a child, remember feeling different and feeling not understanding why people were the way they were. I'd watch, single mom. My dad was around for the first 7 years, but then left, and watching people go to work, come back, eat dinner, go to work, come back, eat dinner, and feeling like there had to be more to life. This couldn't be all there was.
Were you working class or?
My mom grew up. My mom was a teacher. My dad left and then worked up through the ranks and became an assistant superintendent. So very working class, descendant of slaves. Black American on both sides. Both my families were farmers. After sort of slavery, they kind of farmed. And my dad was the first generation college. My mom was, I think, actually third generation college on her side, which was very rare for Americans. But when I was 13, I did okay on a standardized test and ended up getting a scholarship to Andover boarding school, and then from there I went on to Brown University, and through all that I just was questioning everything. I just started looking at what makes us tick, and so I changed my major 4 times at Brown. Started out in international relations, then economics, then English, and then philosophy. I ended up majoring in philosophy. And really got into existentialism, and there's certain Saturday nights, instead of going out, I would sit there and read Nietzsche and kind of go and trying to figure out why we were the way we were. My first job out of college was on Wall Street, actually, back in Baltimore, but very high-powered job at a mutual fund. I hated it.
Was it like Wolf of Wall Street?
Well, at that it was a mutual fund, so it wasn't quite like that. I did trading, which was much more like Wolf of Wall Street. I had one day when I remember I had a corner office, believe it or not, and I looked over the Baltimore Harbor, and I saw my reflection in these 2 windows.
Brilliant.
And one was, if I stayed in that life, and I saw myself getting older in this crumpled suit and wealthy but not happy. And the other one,
Clenched.
I just felt like that future wasn't going to be a good future. And then I saw another one where I didn't know what it was, but I saw like that was supposed to be my path, and I needed to get back on my path. So I actually left the job after 6 months, and my mom and my dad, they freaked out because they spent so much money to send me to these schools. I had this ideal job, and I went.
You're a letdown.
I went back to Brown and started studying theater. And so
I never
we
knew
have the
this.
theater side of life. I didn't go back. I didn't have money to go back to school, but I sat in all these classes. I had teachers who saw that I had fire in my eye and passion, and they let me sit in for 2 years in classes. And I got a mentor who's no longer with us, but who was one of the teachers of the playwriting program and really mentored me. And I produced plays and wrote plays and acted and directed. And,
must give you my one.
And then I came to New York and started a theater company and did that for 3 years here. I worked at the Public Theater, and that was sort of my passion. And even that was about understanding the masks we're all living. Because theater's all about the mask, right? And in the best drama, in sort of traditional drama, it was about, that's why the symbols are these masks, right? It's unmasking the false to get to the real. Whatever is essential in human beings. And
goes right
theater
back,
tends to do that through crisis and catharsis, right? So all that was part of my search.
You were brave because you would have been throwing away the big bucks.
I did throw away the big bucks.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And then but like to parents, that's what the hell are you doing?
They really yelled at me.
And are you an only child?
No, I have a sister who's very successful. She's in academia.
Is she older than you?
2 years younger.
Okay.
So she's a MacArthur Genius Grant winner.
Okay, great.
National Academy of Sciences.
You had at least your parents passed on good genes to you.
I am thankful to them for education and whatever they do.
You were still involved in this sort of higher order thinking at that stage, or was that a catalyst?
It was something in me that was driving me to find whatever it was that I was supposed to do with my life. I just knew somehow I couldn't explain it at that time. I just knew there was something I was supposed to be doing with my life, and I had this burning desire to find it. I've sort of found it over time. I know now that I'm doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing with my life, which to me is one of the greatest feelings on the planet.
Yeah,
to sort of walk in your feet, knowing you're on the right path. And I wandered for a very long time and did lots.
How
of
long
things.
have you been feeling like that?
Like with like pure surety for 10 of the years I've been in the school.
Okay.
But for when I first found the schools, I'll explain how I found the school. I did a bunch of things. I became a Buddhist. I did a bunch of stuff. But I was in a bookstore, and by then I'd at least learned to follow my intuition. And in this bookstore, it was like my hand shot down on this table, and I picked up this book, and I opened it up, and I read the first couple of pages, and my whole body started shaking.
Wow.
And
What's the name of the book?
The Stellar Man by this guy, Dario Salas Summer. He goes by John Baines, that's his pen name. And I read the first couple of pages, and literally everything inside me started shaking. And I took the book home, and I read it in a day.
Wow, I must get it.
And I'll share it with you. And then I there was a second book to it. I read that in a day, and there was a number at the back. And I remember calling that number and saying, "Oh my God, I read these books." And the voice on the other end, who's now a mentor of mine, was like, "And you feel like you've heard this before?" And I was like, "Yes! Oh my God!" And I found out about this meeting, and I, went there, and I immediately felt like this was what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
I couldn't explain it. I just knew that somehow I was on the right path in my life. And absolutely, now
I quite like. I've read
yeah.
Eckhart Tolle stuff and Power Now. I thought it was a great book. I did a bit of that self-help. I guess that's not a really nice name for it.
It's sort of the watered down side of it. The thing about Eckhart Tolle is that he sort of woke up one day on a park bench. So he doesn't actually say this is what you do. This is how you do it. He's actually pretty good at explaining the feeling of being more conscious and explaining the pain body and the feeling body and all that stuff. But he doesn't say what do you do. And what are the steps that you take to actually awaken. Whereas this work really does. It's a step-by-step guide to sort of awakening. If you put yourself through it and do the stuff, you're gonna get.
Well, I'll definitely have to read that, and I'll try and post it on the blurb for the podcast so that people can find it at the end. I wanted to talk a little bit about. I'm Facebook pals with you, and you do spend a lot of your time tackling the race issue in America as it is now, and I think it's fucking terrible.
It's
as an Irish guy here, it's like the guns and the race thing are the two things like smack my head most. And most people back home just can't understand it. Tell me a little bit about, because I also think you do it in a very intelligent way, and you do it in a way that's not
shrieky. Give me your feeling on how that it was your background affected that. I got sort of sense of that from some of your earlier comments.
Sure. Let's start with this. I mean, Black Lives Matter is huge right now, and the idea that African Americans, just statistically, just look at statistics, and it's undeniable that African Americans are shot, beaten, incarcerated, jailed, executed way more, for similar offenses than anyone else. And that's a pure fact. Whether or not people choose to admit that is why we have a debate, in which there shouldn't even be a debate. When you say Black Lives Matter, the fact that someone even has anything else to say is crazy to me. But I use it as a segue to say that when I was 11, I went with my grandmother to Dallas, Texas, and
where I lived for a bit.
So obviously, in the early 80s in Dallas, my grandmother was a medical technologist, was at a conference. We were staying at not an amazingly nice hotel, but obviously a hotel that was a little too nice for us, according to some people.
Really?
So I was walking into my own room by myself, and I out of the corner of my eye, I do remember someone walking by, and down the other hallway, and I guess that person must have felt like I was breaking in, of course, because I was a young black man.
But you were 11.
11, but Tamir Rice was 12.
Yeah.
To a certain person, I must have looked like 25, right? And so my grandmother was actually my grandmother was in the room, thank God, because maybe about 10 minutes later, I think I got undressed to go to the pool, which we were on the first floor, and there's a pool out there. And when I opened the door towards the pool, like 8 cops were there with their guns drawn, like, oh my God, I'll kill you. Really, I crapped my pants. I'm like, what? What did I do? And and thank God I didn't have a wallet in my hand, or a
water
comb,
pistol,
or a water pistol, or moved too quickly, or anything, or I might not be here having this conversation with you today. And I was just like, what? And then luckily my grandmother was there, and I was like, my grandmother's here, and we're here together. And they went in and they checked everything out, and okay. But that's, how can I not be so passionate about that? I almost died, And the thing is, and I'm a relatively preppy kid from the suburbs, and I've been at police gunpoint 3 times in my life for no reason. So this is a real issue.
I can tell you that I have never been at police.
Of course not.
And I probably
have. And all my black friends have. That's the thing. It's so obvious. We just have different.
I would say some of the times I might have been at police gunpoint, the police didn't have guns.
Exactly. There we go. Exactly. But that's just we live in 2 Americas, and that's such a fact. And I know lots of friends from all different races, religions, creeds, classes, and when we're honest with each other, we live in different societies, even if we live in the same neighborhood. I think it's just important to acknowledge that, and that's we've got to have that discussion on a real level and not deny.
I lived in Dallas for about a year. I didn't really agree with me, but I did want to see the upfrontness of it, and it's definitely upfront.
Oh yeah.
But I find it nearly worse because there's a stupidity that goes with it. There's a gun stupidity in Texas. Yeah. Their rationalization for guns is kind of hysterical. But I find it worse up here because in places like Boston and even in New York, it's still well, it's not even denial. It's what Trump's allowing to come out now.
Yes.
It's the fact that people are thinking but not saying.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean by the sort of denial of it. It's like,
And I prefer to have the debate with the person who's able to be upfront about it, because I'm not going to hit them.
I agree,
but I will have. I prefer them to not be this insidious, hidden racism is the worst type.
I think so. Thank goodness I do all the spiritual work, frankly, because the idea that this is back to statistics. 1 in 10 white people will literally say that they think black people are inferior, and 4 in 10 say that we're not doing well just because we're lazier. And that's just people who actually admit it. So this idea,
but not as lazy as Mexicans.
No, of course not. And so the idea, and this is a challenge for as you grow up African American, you read sort of the literature, sort of never knowing who might have some bias and who might not. A lot of people just shut down and say, well, I'm not going to deal with them, because it's like, there's the thinking and not say it, and then there's the real subconscious stuff where it's like you don't even know it. You cross the street on on a dark night, but you would never say, no, not me. I'm not racist. So there's so many levels to it. And trying to navigate that as an African American is extremely challenging.
Yeah.
Because you never know at what level you're dealing with. I was at a very prominent firm, one of the top 4 digital companies right now, probably top 2. I was at a half-day workshop where I saw 9 white males between the ages of 30 and 45 speak at me for 3.5 hours, 4 hours. And I'm just thinking, doesn't anyone even notice this?
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like being white
Yeah.
male is sort of the norm. Even
Yeah.
if you saw 9 white women talk to
Yeah,
you in
yeah.
4 hours, someone go, what's up with all the women?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
if you definitely saw 9 black people
Yeah.
talking to you, you'd be like, why is it all black? But why doesn't anyone think if there's 9 white guys? Like, why isn't that strange?
Yeah.
Because sort of whiteness and maleness is sort of the norm for an authority, and that all sits embedded in our subconscious, which is why we don't think it's odd when we create these kinds of sessions. Which is why when we're hiring, that sense of authority sort of is like, oh, that person seems like he's well qualified.
The diamond in the rough, because we're talking mainly about creative industries.
Yep.
But when you look at music,
Oh yeah, of course.
and again, coming as speaking as an Irish guy, one of people say, how come the Irish have so many playwrights and writers and poets? Well, yeah, people pick up the pen
exactly.
and they write music, and that goes all the way
Of
back to
course,
slavery,
of course,
and yet you look at these other industries like acting. We have a problem in Hollywood. We have a problem
Right.
in advertising,
Right.
which is white man domain
Exactly.
and
There's a
white
lot of great
businessman.
black actors.
Yeah,
Right. There's a
I
lot
know.
and so it's
But the music business, because it's, I guess you can pick up a guitar and you can write, and you can, well, even now you can put it out on the internet and be a hit overnight.
music affects us differently. We don't really usually mostly see the musicians. Like most of the time we're listening to music,
Listening to it, yeah.
we rate it for its
Yeah.
musicianship, right? Whereas film, we're seeing that, and the stories we choose to see are almost the same story over and over again. I mean, it's usually white male saves the world, gets the woman. Whether that's a superhero story, whether that's a it's story. It's sort of that story that Hollywood tells over and over again. Because that's a very safe story and a story we're used to. And
Black people are in films because they're black. My friend Craig Damrauer, who was also a guest on A Pint with Seaniebee, is doing a great project called All the Black People in Citizen Kane.
Oh my God!
And basically what he's doing is he's taking every frame of the whole movie and he's whiteouting everything except the black people. And there's something like 22 over 2 hours. So all you see is the sound and a white screen, and then occasionally one's a taxi driver. There's 3 bands.
I can only imagine. I was like, there are black people in Citizen Kane.
It's amazing project that he's doing, and of course, it's a labor of love, and it's taking forever to do, but it's a great idea. So let's just cross both of those wires now and say we have a need to be more present and conscious in the world, coupled with, I think, probably a stalled state of affairs when it comes to racism and diversity, or in reverse. I was going to say, or in reverse. It might be that it's being we're more aware of it because everyone has a phone that's a camera.
We're more aware of it, but also there's a backlash to a black president.
Yeah,
I mean,
of course. I mean, a lot of it probably just comes down to that.
There's a significant number. I saw some statistic that it's like a significant number of white people actually think that prejudice against white people is stronger than against black people. It's like 40%, something like it's like a big number.
How does apart from maybe giving you possibly a cooler mind, which is critical, I guess, how does the awareness side of things work with that?
Well, I think, when you say that I'm able to sort of stay calm and kind of have these conversations, I have, sort of detached myself from the anger, right? There's a lot of anger. That police incident hurt. The first
Which
time,
one?
Exactly. The first time, when I was a little kid, I remember.
Oh, your one. Sorry.
My the one I was talking about.
11.
I remember the first time, I realized I was black, and that was inferior. I remember talking to a little girl in a store, and she hid when I just wanted to say hi, and she's like, "I'm not allowed to talk to black people."
Wow.
And I had to understand what that meant.
Out of the mouth of
and
babes.
It meant that I was like somehow worse than other people. And that, and then, obviously when you talk about the indoctrination, especially, 70s TV, where it's, again, black people are always pimps or prostitutes or whatever. I could never be the $6 Million Man. I could never be anybody like that.
Huggy Bear
was
he was the only one.
Exactly. So, that stuff sits inside you.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my work actually has been to overcome the inferiority complex that's imposed upon African Americans in the society, because that was deep in my subconscious.
Yeah.
And a lot of the anger comes out of that, because there's sort of two ways you deal with that inferiority complex. There is anger, like fuck you, I'm not, I'm not less than you.
Yeah.
Or there's subservience, or you become, sort of
up.
the field slave, house slave mentality. Which Malcolm X talked about a lot.
Yeah.
Once you can free yourself of that mental slavery, as Bob Marley said, you can be free inside, internally free, and be able just to talk about what it is without all your triggers getting pulled. And so I have a sense of freedom, not just from that, because that's just one aspect of my conditioning, but it's a big aspect of my conditioning.
Yeah.
So it lets me be more free in life about everything.
I can't see the way out of it. How do we get out of this, apart from maybe everyone becoming really deep into spirituality and meditation, which ain't going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously generationally things are changing, right? I live a life that my grandparents could never have lived. So things are changing generationally. While things are still challenging, they're changing incredibly slowly. Not to say I'm okay with that, I just have to acknowledge that, right?
Yeah.
My grandmother, before she passed away, looked at my life and was astonished that I could be...
Yeah.
In the Mad Men days, I'd have been, running the elevator, no matter how smart I was. It's like, so, and I have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And a lot of those guys running the elevator were probably as smart as me, and just didn't have a shot. Not to say I'm super smart. I'm just saying that.
I think you are super smart. We've already covered that biography.
I'm just saying, appreciate that, and just not lauding myself. That being said, I think racial bias, I call it racial bias rather than saying you're a racist,
right,
is on a spectrum. Some people have more or less, but almost all of us have it. Harvard has this really interesting implicit bias test called the IAT that almost anyone can take. And what you find is that almost everybody has implicit bias.
Yeah.
And almost all of us have it against black people.
Right.
Because we've all been conditioned the same way.
Yeah.
So even I saw the same TV that everybody else saw, that black people are pimps and prostitutes and da-da-da. So... even I sometimes have to work through my own, stuff against black people. It lives in our subconscious. So even the most well-meaning person in a moment of crisis, something like that, their bias may come out. The person who called the police on me when I was 11 and, was moving to the door may not have been an outright racist, but to that person, because of her conditioning, she saw someone breaking into a room. And that's what she saw. So I think
if it was an 11-year-old white boy, she wouldn't have done anything.
Of course not.
Yeah.
So it's. I think it's the implicit bias. That's why I don't use words like you're a racist or you're not a racist, because in a sense we all have racial bias. Some have it more pronounced. Some people it's obviously more conscious and willful. For a lot of us, and I include myself in it, it's unconscious, and I think we all have to. That's the conversation we need to have. Is that we all got created in the same stew of a country that was built on racism. Right? I mean, think about the mental conditioning that had to happen to convince an entire people that they were animals. Yeah. And to convince the people who were treating like animals that they were animals.
Yeah,
so
they were owned.
So the owners got the same conditioning than the ownees. So to sit there and have human beings on an auction block and to be trading them like cows, everybody there was brainwashed, and we're all dealing with the effects of that brainwashing that exists in our school books, exists in our, everything I talked about before. That stuff still exists.
And that's only 7 generations.
It's 6 generations racism, and it's from slavery, and it's only, my mother.
Oh no, it's still going.
It's one generation from Jim Crow. My mother wasn't allowed to change clothes in a department store to try on stuff because she was black. And that's my mom.
What is the way out of it? What is the solution?
I wouldn't be on Facebook having these conversations if I didn't think conversations led somewhere.
Yeah.
I have great friends, I guess, that of all races. This conversation's a fantastic conversation. Yeah. I think we get there by having that conversation. I hope we can have a national conversation. But I think it takes those of us who can have that conversation in a moderate way, in a way, and keep it without all the inflammatory dialogue on both sides. Yeah. I think that's super important. And I do believe that conscious awareness, and the more we have of that, the more people do introspect and think about themselves. I think things are going to get better.
What would be your one thing that you would want to leave somebody, say that 11-year-old boy? What would you want to say to him now from this part of your life, looking back?
Follow your gut.
A lot of people say that. Anyway, there's no doubt that one of the biggest gunks on the windshield of life, as you said at the start of this podcast, is racism, and I hope we can clean that one off first. Dave Richeson, it was great. Thank you so much for coming on A Pint with Seaniebee, and keep the fight going, brother, and I'll support you as much as I can, and also going to look into this little book of yours.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. It was fantastic.